Hey, Miss Alford, I want to jump right in and talk about our last time together with Miss Zeno. During our last time together, we set a goal for Miss Zeno to strengthen her ability to be able to jump right into her lessons and provide immediate feedback to the students based on the data that she collects during her do now. And it was refreshing to see that she's moved in that direction. It was obvious that you've been coaching her on that. And so tell me a little bit about what made that so successful.
When looking at her last assessment, she really realized the students will just miss one step in their problems in order to get it incorrect. And for her, it's oh my gosh, if only I could just get them to get this one step right, that would push them to mastery. So she was invested in it. She was excited about actually doing it because she knows once she worked with them small group and gather that data quickly, they don't have to make the same mistakes with their learn checks or in their assessment.
So in your coaching, what did you do that contributed to that success?
Well, first we went through each one of the tests, and we kept identifying the same common mistakes. Then we took the roster and we broke those students up in groups by mastery, partial mastery, and just have no idea remediation group. So once we broke those students up and we kept the consistent list for first, second, and third block, we then practiced her rollout as far as the MVPs that she's going to use to actually get those students to move into groups. Then we did a lot of planning one-on-one to show her what it looks like to differentiate that instruction for those scholars.
Awesome. So I really want to focus on our possible next steps for Miss Zeno, things that she can do once she, continues to collect data. So what exactly were your expectations following the do now when she pulled the data from the diagnostic question and that review question?
So in the moment, I needed her to circulate. I needed her to check and write notes on who's on track and who's not on track. And then I needed her, after she catch those notes, to kind of analyze and figure out how she's going to put them in groups based off of what they're doing on that diagnostic question.
So during that period of time, did you see her being able to execute all of those things?
So she was able to circulate and actually gather the notes, but she had a hard time with figuring out okay, quickly, let me put this student in this group, let me put this student in that group. So she did have a hard time with that.
Okay, so I had a question about once she showed that video on one-step equations. She followed it up with a review sheet that was on two-step equations. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And then the students were grouped based on mastery. So she did have that one group that had mastered it and they were able to move on. And then she had another group that she needed to provide a little more practice for. And she continued to model. What was the gap between her collecting that data on the do now and actually being able to make the adjustments and the modeling for what they actually missed?
Yeah, so the problem was that it wasn't consistent. It was two different skills. And I think she misunderstood because her and I had been talking about the skill gaps. And when we do our planning, we always talk about what skill they need to know before in order to master that skill. So her and I had already talked about them, they got to know how to do one-step equations in order to do two-step equations. So I think she felt doing the video review would give them a quick review with the one-step and then moving into the two-step. But she missed that teacher opportunity to give them some direct instruction and then give them the opportunity to kind of work on the two-step equations.
So that explains the decision making behind that. But what was the biggest challenge for her in making that connection and moving forward in actually meeting that learning target for that day?
I think it had to be, she had to give the same material for the diagnostic, for the independent, for the teacher that I do, and for the independent practice. That was the biggest gap. And she also had a hard time because she came up to me and she was like, can you help me figure out how to put them in the groups? So I think that was the two of the biggest disconnect. She couldn't translate those skills because I think she felt like she was all over the place.
It was moving real quick for her. Okay. So based on what we saw, what do you think your next steps should be with Ms. Zeno?
So I know I need to practice more with how to gather that live feedback. I mean, that live feedback from the students on their progress, but still continue to push with that planning. Being more clear on when we're talking about the skill gaps, what that looks like in the classroom, and just giving her more opportunities to practice her whole lesson from the beginning to the end instead of little segments. Because I missed that segment. We talked about the one-step equation, but she didn't practice that part, but she did practice her execution with the two-step. So I need her to be able to practice from the beginning to the end.
I like how you framed that, starting from the beginning to the end. So one of the first things that I want you to really work with her on is writing those precise learning objectives. If you determine those I can statements with her, that'll ensure that her instructional focus will stay intact and aligned.
Okay.
It'll also give you an opportunity to support her in making sure that her focus for the day is really aligned with that data that she's trying to use on the spot.
Okay.
And with that, using that do now data with the diagnostic and the review questions, definitely continue analyzing that data on the fly. That was real powerful for the students to see where they were starting and what the expectations were for them throughout the class. So they had something concrete to go by. So definitely continuing that. But the how for that would be making sure that the immediate lesson adjustments are made based on those student errors.
Okay.
So talk me through what your what and your how would be.
So I need to make sure that she writes out precise learning objectives and not just writing it out, but understand that objective, and it needs to be consistent, like from the beginning to the end of the lessons. I need to work with her through the I can statements just to make sure that it is aligned to the lesson. For the focus for the day, using the on the spot feedback and being able to analyze that do now question on the fly. And I know for myself, working with her, we're already figuring out the paths on what to do after you get that feedback so she can make those lesson plan adjustments. On the front end, we need to go ahead and have those paths out, like what to do when they get here, and that and third.
Absolutely. So when would be a good time to go back and see this with Ms. Zena? When do you think we can expect that shift?
So her and I will meet on Tuesday for our content planning. So we will be able to actually start making those adjustments with figuring out what the next step for the planning. And I will hope that she will be able to execute it on the next day, on that Wednesday. We'll look at her lesson plans. And so Tuesday we'll plan together, and Wednesday will be a good time to come and see it.
So Wednesday, that's the, let's see, I'm trying to think of my dates. Okay, so on Wednesday the 18th. And which instruction block do you want me to see? That same class? Would that be?
Yeah, that'll be good.
Okay. All right.
The second block.
Second block. Okie dokie. Thank you.
Thank you.
That sounds like a plan.